Historians of the Movies podcast is made possible in part by your donations. If you'd like to support HATM, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/historians of the movies. Now on with the show. Is Terminator the most important film made in the 1980s? That's the question we're asking this week, and the answer may surprise you. Hey everybody, welcome back to Historians of the Movies podcast. I am your host and creator, Jason Herbert, and every single week we are talking about movies and the histories behind them. And this week, we're talking about the film that launched a franchise and one might argue really solidified and launched Arnold Schwarzenegger and James Cameron's careers. So, for this week, we invited on two of our great friends to the podcast, Craig Bruce Smith and Robert Greene II. You guys know these guys. They've been on multiple times. They're two of my best friends on the planet and in part responsible for this nonsense known as HATM. So sit back and relax because we're talking about Terminator. And yeah, we're back. Terminator's next on HATM. So we're not even doing a hard intro at this point in time. People coming to this podcast know who you guys are. You're responsible, the two of you, for HATM.
No, we just hassled you for all the things you do wrong, and then you put us on this.
No, like I think I told you guys before, and this is like once I finally make it big, this is your chance to go back and come back to this podcast and be like, we want money out of this because.
Oh, I'm retroactively counting the amount of time I spent, and you're just going to get a bill when you finally monetize all this.
Let me tell you something. If I finally monetize it, I will happily cut you a check for tens of dollars. But no, for people coming in and listening to this podcast maybe for the first time. So Rob, Craig, and I have been friends for years and years and years, known each other through Twitter. And this all goes back, and I'm sure we're going to reference this
when Twitter was still Twitter.
Yeah, back in like 2017, 2018, right. Over who is the most powerful form of Schwarzenegger. And like that early conversation really got me thinking, oh, wow, other historians like movies too. Historians, they're just like us. Aside from this person are you seeing this person up at the University of Chicago slamming Gladiator 2?
So
I looked at them.
I have so many thoughts on this.
I am so annoyed at this.
The argument the person makes is, so the quote was, I don't think a Roman person even knows what a shark was because apparently there's sharks in the Colosseum. I literally looked this up. There are Roman depictions of sharks going back to the 2nd century BC.
I don't know if people know this, but Italy is surrounded by water, salt water. It turns out it's true. I look at things. I know where maps are.
Pliny the Elder's Natural Histories talks about sharks and fear of sharks. And it's like, what do you... Again, I'm not a Roman historian, but if I know that,
I will admit I did not see this, and I'm glad I did not see this on Twitter.
You should be glad.
It's making the rounds, Rob.
It is, and essentially what you got is angry historian, and essentially what these news agencies did, they just found a classicist at some fancy school, Chicago, who apparently has never seen a movie before, because that's not what movies are supposed to do. And there's a difference between, say, Gladiator 2 and Napoleon. Because Napoleon is like really trying to tell the story of Napoleon. And there's a difference between getting stuff wrong there and getting stuff wrong with Glad. It's like, oh, well, there weren't newspapers. Stop it already. All they're trying to say is like they're using this as set pieces. It's not a documentary. Films are not documentaries. They are movies. They're stories.
Yeah, but it was I think the person called it nothing but Hollywood bullshit. Whenever I hear stuff like that, it just sounds like bitter historian. Why aren't like 5 people buying my book?
Oh, I don't even want to say I'm sure the person is not a person. I have no idea. I'm sure they're probably awful.
No, I'm sure they're a typical historian.
Yeah, I just spent a whole week with typical historians in Kansas City. For those of you who hung out with me, I love you guys. For those of you who didn't and aren't listening to this pod. So, I get annoyed, but that's okay. Like it just seems to me like this person is missing the idea of what a movie is supposed to do and what a movie is supposed to be. And there are certain films that are trying to be historically accurate and miss the boat, which is Dix of Sharks. And then there are other films that are like, hey, playing loosely with history, and that's okay. And this is the latter.
And you know what? I want to see a shark in the Colosseum. I want
I
to
do
see what
too.
that looks like. I didn't
wanna see
know
that.
about that, but now I want to see it.
I want to see the rhino. I'm very excited about the rhino because the rhino was originally supposed to be in the first film.
Finally, the technology has caught up to us, and we segue this way by talking about technology catching up. So look at that.
Do you want to do this? All right. So Craig, you came to me. It is the 40th anniversary of Terminator. That's what we're here to talk about tonight. It is a classic. I would dare say perfect film. It's definitely up there.
It's hard to quantify because again, and we've talked about this before. I flip flop depending on what day you ask me if Terminator 1 or Terminator 2 is the better movie.
I have a solid answer on that, but I'll wait for Rob.
You don't get Terminator 2 without Terminator 1. So I'm going to put out all my disclaimers. All views are my own and whatnot because places, where I work sometimes, AI is and all sorts of things are being discussed about. So I'm saying all views are my own. I have no special knowledge of anything. I watched a lot of movies.
The past or of the future.
Right. Who knows? But here's what I'm going to say. Given all of the discussion about AI, about, cyber things, about hacking, about information, warfare, misinformation, all this stuff, I am going to go out right away. I'm going to throw this out there that right now, Terminator is the most important movie for our era because it speaks to all of these issues. Everything we're worried about has played out in the mind of James Cameron. The question is, are we smart enough to heed the message?
I saw a thing the other day. There was a meme, right? Because all the Tesla robots are going on. Are you guys seeing the stuff like the Tesla robot or whatever will like watch you sleep? Because that's definitely what I want to have happen. And there was a meme of there's this of this dialogue between Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese in the film. She's saying robots can't do that, and he's like, no, they can't right now. But in 40 years, they'll be able to. We're 40 years. They called it.
But not fully. I mean, we don't have, cyborgs with human skin and bad breath and body odor and stuff. But
is that a thing we're looking forward to?
I hope I never see it.
All right. Rob, what's your initial take on Terminator?
I think Terminator is one of those films that is very much a genre-defining film in its own right. I'm a big science fiction fan, but I'm not a big fan of the subgenre of science fiction horror, which I think Terminator is very much part of. And yet it is such an effective film in how it not only uses Arnold Schwarzenegger as Terminator, but it uses him in a way where he is really terrifying on the big screen. Which again, going back to Craig's point about Terminator 2, it is such a marked contrast in the two films. And I don't want to get too far in T2, but in T2, the first teaser trailer, you're not sure if he's still the villain or the hero because everybody still remembers the first Terminator film. And I think with this discussion, we should ask listeners to really just think, at least for right now, about the first Terminator film. Terminator franchise looks very different if you just focus on that. It's a lot like Star Wars in that if you just think about Star Wars in 1977, it feels different from, say, including the rest of the franchise. I think Terminator, as Craig said, is a great film. It's a genre-defining film. And I think with all these discussions of AI, it's taking on a new light in ways that we couldn't have imagined in the 1980s or even 1990s.
Yeah, listen, there's no way we can talk about Terminator without talking about Terminator 2 because it's very much that aliens
exactly
relationship. You could argue that either is not only and they're both and certainly it's weird because I think Alien is sci-fi horror and Aliens is sci-fi action, just like the same with Terminator and Terminator 2. You have to do something slightly different because otherwise it's not it doesn't work.
But the messages are completely different. In Terminator 1, yes, Sarah Connor, destroys the T-800. Yeah, she escapes, but Judgment Day is not stopped.
Right. It's inevitable.
Whereas Terminator 2 has the complete opposite message, and then they flip-flop in T3, and then we're not getting into, the rest.
Listen, every time we start to talk about this, I'm going to invoke another film called Hot Tub Time Machine. When they're trying to figure out how to get back in time, and they're figuring out everything. And was it Craig? What's the comic's name? He's doing a big line of coke in the film. He's like, no, it's just like Terminator because they don't go back in time, and they never hook up, and then and so forth. Like, watch the film. It's a perfect recap of how this is the perfect example of time travel. To answer your earlier question, though, Craig, I think that this is Terminator is my favorite of the two for a couple different reasons. It's scary. It's first of all, it's inventive, right? It's the first of its kind, right?
I would agree. There are some nods, and even Arnold will nod to Westworld and Yul Brynner.
Yes. Oh gosh, Westworld is a film we should do because I watched that a lot growing up.
But Terminator is completely different, right? Aside from there is a cyborg that looks like a person, I think they're completely different in every way.
Well, there's also the Furlong factor, which no one likes to talk about, but Edward Furlong is awful in Terminator 2. He's just awful. He's not good.
Well, no, I think we've talked about this before.
I was rooting for the Terminator. No. I was rooting for the T-1000 the whole time. No, Patrick, if you could kill Edward Furlong.
All right, here's the issue. I think we've talked about this. I don't know if we talked about this on the show or off air or somewhere, but whatever. This is because we are all of a certain age where we could have been Edward Furlong. All these kids in the Arnold movies, we could have been them. We could have been hanging out with Arnold. We could have done it just as well, if not better. And we're all secretly bitter about it.
I'm a little older than Rob, so I feel like Rob might have been in Kindergarten Cop.
Yeah, he could have been. Rob could have been in Kindergarten Cop, but again, the rest. You're a little older than me, so maybe you could have been Jenny.
How dare you, sir? I say that as I drink my wine because that's what you do at my advanced age.
But you could have been kidnapped by Bennett. It would have worked. I probably would have been Eddie Furlong.
Weakest ass villain in action movie history.
But I am just saying, when it comes to kids in Arnold movies, we're just bitter. Or maybe Rob could have really wanted a Turbo Man. I don't know.
No, I think I was too old for that by that point.
Never too old to want a Turbo Man.
Who is the star of this film?
The all important. I argue there are two male leads, but at the same time, so there's a big difference between Sarah Connor in T1 and T2. She's definitely a lead, but she's more of a damsel in distress for most of it until the end, when she literally saves the hero, on your feet, soldier. And she's the one that defeats the Terminator. So she really has this, she has a legitimate character arc in the movie. Everyone remembers, she gets like incredibly, built for 2, but she has that same character arc in Terminator 1. I think you could argue it's got 3 leads, but I'm also willing. It's no secret that I think Arnold is the greatest, movie star of all time.
This is going to hurt your Tom Cruise love.
All right. Tom Cruise has the longevity, but no one touches him, Rob. No one touches him.
He's doing a short circuit.
All right.
Okay.
So, Arnold, what does he have? 20 words in the movie?
14 lines of dialogue.
Yeah, it's nothing. So at the time, you could argue, well, maybe Michael Biehn's the star. But in hindsight, Michael Biehn, though he's in so many great movies, he's just can't compare. He's like vanished. So you want to talk about revisionist history? It's almost as if Michael Biehn did not exist. The power of Schwarzenegger is that great.
I would actually go a different route. I think Schwarzenegger is the star of the film in the sense that whenever he's on screen, you can't take your eyes off of him. And not only in terms of how large he is, but also his movement. Like, I think I retweeted a video about this on Twitter a few days ago about how he discussed how he did his movements in the film, how he had to move a certain way, how he took that into consideration and all of that. And that's really an important part of that movie, how he moves, how he acts. You actually start to think this guy's an actual cyborg. But I would also add, in terms of stars of the film, I would go a different direction and say, I think one of the things that makes Terminator unique is the soundtrack. The music for that film adds a certain ambience to it that you just can't get out of your head. Even when you're not watching the film, if you think of the music, it invokes the sheer terror and panic that you feel throughout the film.
It's like Jaws in the same way. You can create a villain with just a theme. You get the same feeling, I think, from Terminator. Again, they change it a little bit in T2 to make it a bit more, heroic pop, but the dun 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 dun. So here's the thing, and this is where I'm going to go out and say no one else could have played the Terminator but Schwarzenegger at that moment.
No.
I don't think there's anyone you could have gotten that would have played it the same way. They would have been trying to go to overact it, whereas he pulled back and he said, I'm going to play this like a machine. And I think that's the discipline he had from bodybuilding. The fact that, in the clip you talk about, he talks about how he spent, 3 hours every night taking apart guns blindfolded to show he just knew how to do it. At that moment, I don't think there's anyone else in Hollywood that would have taken a role with, like, whatever, what'd you say, 14 lines, showing no emotion. What actor signs up for that? No one else could have done it.
No, and it's such an important thing, right? I think that also shows Arnold's coachability, that he was willing to be directed. He's still young in Hollywood at this point in time. Let's see, Terminator comes out in 1984. He's been in Hollywood. Really, Hercules in New York is in 70, but that's not an acting. That's not an acting role. Really, his role at entry is actually only 2 years earlier. Mm-hmm. Is in Conan the Barbarian, and then he follows 2 years later, just before this film's released. With
he won a Golden Globe for Stay Hungry in, I think, 77. So
but he hasn't been on scene long. He's still a young guy.
Yeah,
right. And I think that there's famously how he wanted to play the role of Kyle Reese. He wanted to be the hero in this.
Yeah, this is interesting.
And Cameron had to say, "You'd be better off as Terminator." He goes back and thinks about it. But Craig, I think you're going to point to the multiple storylines behind how he gets the role.
No, there are multiple stories here.
Take us through them.
So you're right. The traditional, the James Cameron version is James Cameron realizes Arnold is the perfect Terminator because this is a very director thing to do. I saw the genius, and Arnold supposedly doesn't want to do it. He wants to play the hero. He's only taking hero roles. Arnold at that point is successful enough. He refuses to take character parts. He's like, I am not playing a German officer in a movie. I'm not playing some tough guy. I only want starring parts.
He's on the cusp of something big.
But he knows that. He's like, he has enough money. He's like, I don't have to take stuff.
Incredibly intelligent man.
At that point, he's making enough money off his apartment buildings that he doesn't audition. Mm-hmm. He's just like, I'm playing the hero. So eventually, he agrees, and even Arnold will admit to that. But there's also the older version of the story that Rob was talking about in this clip, where he's like, I am the one who was more drawn towards the villain. It was something different. I knew how to play it in a way that no one else could. And where there is some points of continuity is that Cameron agrees that when he was talking to Arnold for the Kyle Reese part, Arnold was so adamant about what type of person had to play the Terminator, and they had to do it in this way with this amount of discipline. And then that's where Cameron's like, yeah, it has to be you, or else we could have had O.J. Simpson.
And O.J., big guy, but nothing compared to Schwarzenegger.
Or Lance Hendrickson. That was the original first pick.
Well, Hendrickson's got that much more of the Robert
Patrick kind of.
That Robert Patrick, much more in that Robert Patrick mold, right? Where, and there's an important thing about the physiology of each character. In the T-1000 can't be just a bigger version of Schwarzenegger. That's not interesting. It's got to be a much smaller, lithe guy.
But it's also, that speaks about, think about the emergence of technology, how your cell phone gets smaller. So of course the earlier versions are going to be bigger and bulkier.
Oh, that makes sense.
And as they get perfected, they're smaller, they're sleeker. So I think that's fitting in very well with the sort of history of technology. Whereas I think where the Predator franchise has gone wrong is now we're going to have the Super Predator. It'll be twice the size of a regular.
Could not agree with you more. In fact, absolutely. I think the Predators should have just stayed with the original Predator.
By the way, I saw a kid out trick-or-treating as Predator the other night.
Well, he's doing a really bad job then, isn't he?
No, yeah, I saw him, right. So I asked him, have you seen the original? And he's there with his mom and his dad. His response, what do you think? Tell me what he said.
If it bleeds, I can kill it.
No. He goes, my dad let me watch it. My mom wouldn't.
Yeah. God bless him. There's still good men in the world. Rob, what are your thoughts? I want to ask you this, right? If we agree that nobody else could have played Schwarzenegger, I'm going to put you in your time capsule here. Could anyone else played Sarah Connor? Because we've seen other people try in the film since, right? We've seen a few different times. There was the TV show where a woman from Game of Thrones is on there.
A lot of Game of Thrones actresses.
Yeah, actually, because you actually had 2 Game of Thrones actresses play Sarah Connor. You're absolutely right. But let's think back in our time period here, early 80s.
In 1984. Yeah, that's
84.
I mean, the easy button for that role could have been someone like
Farrah Fawcett,
Sigourney Weaver. But here's the thing with Sigourney Weaver:
she's too tough.
She's tough and she's tall.
Too tough.
Right.
Linda Hamilton is, and this was just talked about. Someone, I forgot who did it. Someone wrote an article on Linda Hamilton being like the godmother of the female action star, which I think is spot on. But it's also talking about how that she is, she's only like 5'5", 5'6". She doesn't fit the role of an action star.
No.
But that's why it works.
Compared to, say, her role in T2, she's very soft, if you will. Like, she's not buff. She's quite petite, and you have to have that, right?
I would even go a step further and say that I think one of the reasons Linda Hamilton works well in T1 is that she, to borrow expression, she looks like the girl next door.
Yeah,
she's like someone you would actually know who would work in a diner, have a regular life, who might be attractive, but otherwise not really stand out in a crowd, which I think makes a marked contrast with her in T2, where if you saw her in public, you would think, oh, I'm not going to mess with her. I'm going to leave her alone. But in T1, she's like a regular woman out working.
I mean, who would have been up for it at that point? I mean, I think you have options. Who could have pulled it off? That's a whole other question.
I got somebody. You ready?
Yeah.
Jacqueline Smith from Charlie's Angels.
I don't think it works because she's in a show that, is action adventure-y.
Yeah, and she might be too beautiful. Like Rob was saying, like she was the Linda Hamilton's the girl next door. Jacqueline Smith's Charlie's Angels. Like, she's going to stand out. Like, I don't know. I'm trying to think about who else.
What about Elizabeth Shue?
Too young.
Well, Sarah Connor, they never say how old she's supposed to be. She could only be like 18, 19.
Yeah. I'm thinking who else? Sissy Spacek would be in the same range, but I don't think she works. Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah,
Jamie Lee Curtis. Jamie Lee Curtis. She might be a bit tall, but Scream Queen, beautiful, can act. That's what I got.
It could work. I think it's one of those. I think Linda Hamilton. You need Linda Hamilton. Listen, here's one of these things where the film gets cast perfectly all the way down. Let's talk to our third lead here. Was Michael Biehn the greatest action star who wasn't? He is in so many great movies.
And he's good in this,
he's good,
Craig.
Yeah.
He is.
He's good in every single role.
Right.
He shows up and you go, okay, this guy is going to give us a performance, whether he's Kyle Reese, who we all love, right?
Or he's a Navy SEAL.
Navy SEAL, or he's Johnny Ringo.
Johnny Ringo was great.
Listen, one of the reasons why that film was so good is because he's so bad.
Yeah, but the thing is, he completely vanishes after Tombstone, which is like shocking. He's doing like made-for-TV, like teen slasher movies.
He was also supposed to be in James Cameron's Spider-Man film. He was going to be the lead as Peter Parker in the 80s when they were.
That wouldn't have worked.
I think it would have worked if you have I've always liked an older Peter Parker. I've never really liked teenage Peter Parker. I think that's always been a kind of a failure. Oh, look. For those of you listening right now, Craig just subtly threw off his Arnold watch. He's wearing his Arnie right now. I don't think I was going to pick that up, sir. You've tried to do it a couple times, so I was like, might as well call you out on it. He's not wearing the Arnie in this film.
No, he's not.
He'll wear it in the following year in Commando. Bean, I think, had a reputation for being hard to work with.
Well, he certainly could work with Cameron.
He's great in The Abyss as well.
Yeah.
And Michael Bean still works. Like, I would still like to see him stuff. I don't know.
I mean, I think Bean is one of those actors who he's the kind of actor, if you make a comparison to sports, he's an athlete who was really good, not quite Hall of Fame level, but he was an important cog on championship teams. Right. Michael Bean is the same with Frank. Yeah, a great six man. You know, he's the kind of person you need to be that last piece to make a movie work.
Yeah, usually, he's going to come in for 14 points, and then every so often he's going to drop 36, and Bean was phenomenal. Like, and again, we're talking about, he's like, oh my gosh, Bean and everything. We go all the way back to The Rock. Every time he shows up, if he's in a movie and he doesn't show up as the lead very often. I think maybe the biggest role he has after this, he's Navy SEALs, right?
Navy SEALs, I think.
Gets overshadowed by Charlie Sheen.
He does.
In that role. And and Joanne Wally Kilmer. Oh, Joanne Wally Kilmer could have done this role.
Doesn't work if she's British, though.
She could do an accent.
Yes, she could do a different accent.
I'm just saying she could do a different accent. Okay. Let me ask you, let's go back to Arnold. Is this film the most important movie in Arnold Schwarzenegger's life?
Yes. Not hands down, no question. It is the most important. It makes him he was on his way, but this makes him a household name.
I think the question we should, in a way to look at this question is, what film that you remove from his corpus of films completely alter his career? And I think Terminator is the one. It's like Terminator, if he doesn't do it, it's hard to see how the rest of his career goes. Like, I think Craig's right that he will have a good career, but I think Terminator is the thing that makes him someone who is marketable, someone who is sought after. And really from that point on in the 80s, like the films that he does, no matter what he's doing for example, no matter what he's doing in other films, there are often references to Terminator in those films, like jokes about I'll be back, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. You can't imagine his career without those one-liners, without that reference to Terminator popping up over and over and over again.
Well, if I can, let me give it to you the two immediate films before Terminator. 1982 is Conan the Barbarian, followed by Conan the Destroyer. Then we get Terminator. And then in 85, the next movie we get is the unofficial third Conan film, Red Sonja. Same role. Smaller.
Yeah, he was still stuck under the old contract on that one.
Yeah. Not a good film, but it's whatever. And then we get to see maybe what would have made his career really, really good without Terminator. He goes on this run. Commando, Raw Deal, Predator, Running Man, Red Heat, Twins, Total Recall, Kindergarten Cop, T2, and then some shit film called Last Action Hero.
How dare you speak ill of that movie?
I've tried. You and Daniel tried to talk me into that horse shit film starring another Game of Thrones alum. Charles Dance is in that.
I gotta say, I'm actually with Craig on this one. Last Action Hero.
You like it?
Yes, I like it a lot, actually.
I find it to be unwatchable.
Abraham.
Unwatchable. Another awful, horrible kid. Maybe I don't like kids.
You just want to be that kid. You just are so jealous. That's why.
Really? Because I'm built more like Schwarzenegger. I'm just saying.
Whatever you tell yourself, you look more like Stallone in the poster for Terminator 2.
Oh,
that's fine. I'll take it. 94 gets us True Lies, Junior. I mean, and then then that's when we start to see the drop off. When he goes 96 as Eraser, Jingle All the Way, Batman and Robin, End of Days, Sixth Day. He never really. I think the peak of his career is really at True Lies in 94. I think that after True Lies, there is a step down. Films are still doing well, but it's clear like the pinnacle, like being on the mountaintop, is kind of stepped down as far as quality, production. He's still making money and still making movies for years and years and years. I don't see another film that's not, and even he's in a bunch of Terminator films that are frankly not good.
But the thing is, whenever a Terminator movie comes out, that the interest rises. So he's in T3. I think at that
T3,
point,
I think was actually not bad. I kind of enjoyed it.
I think he's the highest paid actor ever at that point, and from there
million?
he goes right into governor of California. So
Yeah.
talk about a campaign trail. He's got Terminator 3. But I think you're right. So I would argue T2, that is he is untouchable. He's in the rarefied Mount Olympus of movie stars at that point. And then I think you're right. True Lies is True Lies is his rebound after Last Action Hero, which doesn't do well because people don't know Genius.
It's just an awful shit film.
I know this is a slight aside.
It's the My Brother of movies, but go on. Like some people, I was going to say, Mom.
I think Last Action Hero is one of those films that might have been before its time, in the sense that it's Schwarzenegger making fun of himself in a lot of ways, but in a way that is really letting the audience in on the joke and saying that this is our genre of action movies. In a lot of ways, it was sort of the last hurrah of what 80s action movies were, because after that, we kind of transitioned from the Schwarzenegger Stallone era to seeing films like The Matrix, etc., that are action films, but in a different way. But linking back to Terminator, right? Still have the whole presence of AI and all that. But I think Last Action Hero is a film that I get a lot of enjoyment out of, precisely because it's playing with all these movie tropes and doing so in a way that is not in your face so much as it's actually enjoyable and fun. But I know it's not for everyone. I think when the movie came out, it was at a time where maybe audiences weren't quite ready for that.
Yeah, but it's also everyone's expecting T2 level for everything he does at that point.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Let me ask you this. I think we could all agree that certainly mid-'80s, Arnold's the biggest action star in the world, or biggest movie star in the world, not just action star, but movie star, period. Let's go. Let's just use the Mount Rushmore analogy here. Top 4 actors/actresses of the 1980s and 90s during Schwarzenegger's prime. And I'm not talking about actors. I'm talking about movie stars. Let's shade this a little bit towards Arnold. Who's drawing the most 80s and 90s? Who you got?
Schwarzenegger's got to be up there. Stallone is up there too. If it's the 80s, again, if you're talking about Arnold, it's Schwarzenegger, Stallone. That rivalry is the 80s.
Okay.
Cruise is up there, or at least he's
has to be Cruise. Top Gun comes out in 86 and rocks the world.
I mean, I think that those three have to be in my Mount Rushmore as well, but I'm trying to think of a fourth person, like a movie star, because I think that's the key here. It's not necessarily an action star.
You're right there and you're missing it.
Who is it?
It's Harrison Ford.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
From, say, 1980 to 2000, say a 20-year run?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely right. Ford. Because I was going to point out, one of the things about 1984 in film that's really interesting is that if you look at like a listing of the top films of that year, it is a murderer's row of great films. Like films that people watch over and over again. Terminator, Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom, Ghostbusters, for Star Trek fans like myself, Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. You've got, you've got Police Academy, Footloose, Breakin' even, The Natural, Purple Rain. It is a fantastic year for film, and that makes a Terminator all the more impressive because it stands out in that crowd.
It really does. And it's weird because every time someone tells me The Natural comes out in 84, I'm like, that feels like so long. I always feel like The Natural is a more recent film for some reason. I love that movie. It has one of my favorite movie scenes of all time when he hits the home run with the music. It's one of the glorious scenes in all of movies and in baseball, unlike my goddamn Yankees, who apparently can't play baseball when the World Series happens. So that was awesome. Thank you. I played as much baseball in the World Series as Aaron Judge did this year. So that was great. It doesn't hurt. Listen, we got to lose. We'll lose to the Dodgers. It's okay. Like, it's another one of the great all-time teams. I can handle it. They beat our ass. The Yankees play like shit. That Game 5 was awful. I want to say I'd like to give an alternate to Stallone. Because aside from Rambo and Rocky, right?
Yeah,
that's hard to do. You're right, Craig. You're right. But the problem is, it's like by 90, Stallone is fading pretty hard, is he not?
He is fading.
I don't know that he carries from 90 to 2000, is my thoughts.
No, he's doing Stop or My Mom Will Shoot.
Right. So I'm thinking Hanks may actually be maybe the fourth instead of Stallone.
Not in the 80s, though.
Yeah, I do. And here's why. Because in the 80s, Hanks is dominating with comedies, man. You've got Splash. You've got what was the one where they go to Peace Corps?
You know
what I'm talking about? No, there is Joe and the Volcano, but
the best is the Burbs. Burbs is his best, but I don't think he's at the pinnacle.
I disagree. I think if you put Tom Hanks' filmography in the 80s to 90s versus Stallone, here's what I'm going to give you. And let's not forget how massive Forrest Gump has not aged well, but 94, it's massive.
Right.
It's a massive.
That's the 90s.
Well, that's what we're saying, the 80s to 90s. So here we go. Ready? Splash in 84. Okay. Same year as this film comes out. It's another 84 film, Rob. Right? Volunteers, 85. Money Pit, 86. Dragnet, 87. Big in 88. Big was massive. The Burbs, Turner and Hooch in 89. Joe versus the Volcano in 90. League of Their Own in 92. Sleepless in Seattle, Philadelphia, Forrest Gump, Apollo 13, Toy Story, That Thing You Do, Saving Private Ryan, You've Got Mail, Toy Story 2, The Green Mile.
So Tom Hanks in the 90s has got an all-time run. Will not dispute.
You may argue that Tom Hanks may have one of the great runs of all time.
Yeah, in the 90s, absolutely.
I'm just saying, so if you compare 80s and 90s, we're going this two-decade time period.
If you're going 2 decades, I'll go Hanks over Stallone.
There you go. I win.
I mean, if you're doing the 2 decades, I think you might be right in terms of Hanks over Stallone, except I would say that Stallone had enough star power to where he was getting folks to see some films that were just not very good in the 90s. I mean, I like, for example, Demolition Man with Stallone and Wesley Snipes. It is one of my
so bad.
It is, but it's also a guilty pleasure film, more so for Snipes.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, more than anything else.
Rob, what did you do with the 3 seashells?
I should not comment about that on this podcast, but I think Stallone in the 90s is also in an odd place career-wise because he does Copland, where he's trying to show he's a serious actor. And Copland Copland's actually, I think, not a bad film, but a lot of folks felt that, it wasn't what they expected, because half the folks went to see it thought it'd be like an action film. The other half were like, it's different.
You know who the best person in Copland is, don't you? It's Ray Liotta all day.
Oh yeah.
Why Ray Liotta doesn't become known as maybe one of the great actors of his time, because even in his time when Goodfellas comes out and Pesci and De Niro getting all the love, watch that movie and tell me Ray Liotta does not trump everybody in that film. And this is all love to that film because Lorraine Bracco is amazing in that. That movie is phenomenal all the way around. It's my 5th favorite movie of all time. But it's because of Liotta. He carries that film, and it's got the greatest fourth wall break in my mind in the history of film.
All right, we're getting off topic. Too much on this mob movies.
It's my pod. I can do what I want. We're moving back and forth in time, just like Terminator. All right, let me ask you this. What are your favorite parts of this film, of Terminator?
I mean, the easiest thing to say is it's whenever, I think Rob said it earlier, whenever Schwarzenegger's on in the scene, you cannot look away. What I always found interesting is whenever, to me, just is personally, is when Bean talks about the future and what's happening. Yeah. And the sort of disbelief, that always found sort of compelling. It's also, I was born on, my birthday is Judgment Day. So as a kid, I remember being particularly struck by that and always counting, would I make it to, whatever birthday, or would Judgment Day actually come? But what I will give credit to, the greatest pickup line in history, Michael Biehn. I traveled across time for you, Sarah. Da-na-na-na-na-na.
It's actually a really good line. I can't even argue. Listen, I've thrown out some really good lines. I'm not even going to talk about it because we talked about stuff earlier before we came on. But yeah, it's a great line. Rob, what about you? What's your favorite parts of this film?
So I think my favorite part of the film, one of my favorite parts is actually the shootout at the police headquarters.
Oh yeah,
where he looks absolutely unstoppable, and in that sequence, it's actually quite jarring to watch, considering that he's killing numerous police officers. And we think about how the police are venerated in American society, and yet you have in both Terminator and Terminator 2, by the way, as an aside, you do have this sort of interesting thing where the police are in Terminator 1, the police are actually the victims, if you think about it, and how they can't stop Terminator. In Terminator 2, they're the villain, played by Robert Patrick, who impersonates a police officer, and it's been said that James Cameron did it on purpose because of the Rodney King verdict and the LA riots and such, and critiquing police brutality through that lens. But I think the first Terminator film, when you see him, up to that point, you see Schwarzenegger shoot people and do all this, but that police headquarters scene where the police are getting everything they can to stop this one guy and they cannot do it really is quite breathtaking to watch. My other favorite scene in the film is when the Terminator is first injured and he has to repair himself in his apartment. And, it's a sparse apartment and he's trying to fix his arm. He's fixing his eye. And it really gets across the cyborg nature of the Terminator with, I think, some really creative special effects and creative camera work to make it look like Schwarzenegger is poking his own eye out in the process of making these repairs. But it gets across that this guy is a killing machine, but he has to also fix himself in a way. Again, going back to what Craig said earlier, if it bleeds, we can kill it. Here it's, if the metal's exposed, might have a chance. But those two scenes for me just really evoke how unstoppable, how inhuman the Terminator is in that first film.
For me, it's always that first time we see him. He zooms in, he's completely naked, and it's just like, there he is, right? Just this complete, you know what I mean? It's like, it's this superhuman
nice night for a walk.
form. Yeah, right. Do we have to kill? Do we have a moment for Bill Paxton?
Well, Bill Paxton is the only person to be. He's killed by a Terminator, an alien, and a Predator. Yes. Right. I think he's the only one to have that honor.
That's correct. He's run the holy trinity of deaths in films. I mean, God bless him. I love Bill Paxton, man. He was so much great. We just did the Twisters pod, and it's weird because he still overshadowed that new film. It was like, and Bill Paxton's a very much everyman kind of guy. He's just great. I love Paxton. Are there weaknesses of this film?
I mean, there, of course, and they did it on a small budget. I mean, what had Cameron done before this? Like Piranha 2. This is not a major blockbuster. It's done, bare bones. The special effects I still think are pretty good, but it does age, right? It has aged in a way that T2 I don't think has aged in the same way. But I think it's toned down because of money. Again, they also, Cameron said I was going for the tech noir, a new genre, also in the name of the club. But I think it's the budget. There are some bare bones sections of this.
I think it ages it's aged the same way that some of the classic horror films of that era have aged, in the sense that, yes, there are some parts that are, again, that the small budget really shines through, but you're willing to live with that because the action is great, the acting is great. And I think in particular, for me, the part that in terms of special effects has aged the most is at the end when the Terminator's just like the metal skeleton.
Yeah, the clay motion.
It's clear stop motion. And yet, even in that context, it actually works because it gets across this is an actual machine. And so the stop motion actually works in that context. You understand what it is, and it looks outdated to us now, but it still works. It's actually quite creepy to see in the shadows in the dark against the fire.
If I can come back to this, I think that one of the strengths of this film is actually the fact that it was made for a relatively low budget.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because with really, and I don't think there's any doubting that James Cameron is one of the great filmmakers of his time, of our time. And I think that part of the reason why we know this is because the lack of budget means you've got to get creative.
Yeah.
A great example of this is the most recent Godzilla -1 film, because very limited budget with that film. You've got a very talented filmmaker and talented cast, right, and people around them who have to get creative in the ways that they tell this story. Godzilla -1 is a Godzilla movie with no Godzilla. I mean, it's just not, he's not really even there. And it's brilliant because they build the story around the threat of Godzilla. We don't see the Terminator that much. And Rob, when you were saying much earlier in this pod tonight about like you can't take your eye, when Terminator's on screen, you can't take your eyes off him. And I think that actually the inverse is actually true with this film. I think that when Terminator is not on screen, you're constantly going, "Where's the Terminator?
Right?
Where's he going to? When is he going to show up?"
It's like Poochie. When Poochie's not on screen, the other characters should be asking, "Where's Poochie?" Simpsons reference.
Yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about, but that's good. I
Rob,
like Poochie.
You get it?
I asked you earlier if Terminator was the most important film for Schwarzenegger. There's a person we haven't spoken about very much at all, and that's Cameron. Is Terminator, this one, the most important film for James Cameron?
Yes. Because let's look what he did before that. He got fired from Piranha 2. This is not Academy Award winning. Supposedly he broke into like the studio at night to like edit it to preserve his genius. And that's where he had some like midnight induced hazy dream where the Terminator was chasing him. And that's how he came up with the idea. Everything that comes after this is a direct result of Terminator. So you could say, hindsight will say it's Titanic or something like that, but he doesn't get there without this. That he was able, and I think you're right. The fact it has a low budget forces him to be creative. It forces the story to be good and can't just get by on like stuff blowing up. It also, in a lot of ways, forces him to go with a less well-known cast than if he had a major studio budget. I mean, who knows? Like, what is this going to be? Like Paul Newman and Robert Redford. It could. Well,
even Schwarzenegger wasn't a super megastar at this point in time.
Yeah.
I mean, he was in competition with OJ for this role.
I mean, Jack Nicholson. I mean, it could have gone really off the rails if there had been a studio putting a lot of money in it.
Oh, without question, I think this is a big film for Cameron, and I think tonight we've made, I think, a sensible case for this film being one of the most important films from the 1980s and early 90s. Because if you think about the impact it has on Schwarzenegger and Cameron, then you think about the impact it has on Hollywood as a whole in that time period. It alters the course of several careers, and I think for Cameron, certainly it really gave voice to someone who had this really dynamic vision of what filmmaking could be. And I think certainly with Terminator, again, on a small budget, it showcased what he could do, which led to some, bigger projects down the road.
What's Cameron's best film? I'm gonna read some for while you're thinking.
I know what I'm gonna say.
I think I know what you're going to go with too, but let me throw some numbers out here for our listeners here who might not be familiar with Cameron's filmography. Okay. We've got Terminator in 84, Aliens in 86, The Abyss 89, T2 in 91, True Lies in 94, Titanic in 97, Avatar comes in at 2009. So there's a big layoff between Titanic and Avatar. We get the second Avatar film in 22.
He was doing documentaries.
And to his great credit, Cameron is this kind of guy who I actually like very much because he's like, I'm curious about the world. I've done these things. I want to go see what's out there. I think that's actually
remember when he also
interesting thing about the guy.
He did the, his dive for the Titanic or the Lusitania or something. And then he followed up with, we have discovered the body of Jesus. That like he produced it for like Discovery Channel or something. It aired like once and then it was gone.
He has, and look, he's according, and I've got Wikipedia directly from me. He's done a lot of other things as well. He is an uncredited rewriter of Point Break. Of course, he was married to Catherine Bigelow as well. James Cameron, one of his great feats is actually marrying half of the women in Hollywood. I think that's actually really impressive. But yeah, he did Cirque du Soleil, Worlds Away. He was a writer and producer of Alita, Battle Angel. Producer of Terminator: Dark Fate, and he's got a bunch of stuff. He was the writer of Rambo: First Blood Part 2 in '85. So he's done a bunch of stuff. But his best film, when you look at it, go, what film is James Cameron? When you think about who is James Cameron as an artist, as a director, I'm going to ask you to pick one. What's the Cameron film you're going to say this is Cameron? This is his strength.
Terminator 2. Why? Because it's got all the cutting edge special effects, but it's still it's got all the whiz bang. It's got all the big money. It's a summer blockbuster, but at the heart, it's a good, compelling story.
Yeah, I got to agree. I think it's Terminator 2 because I wanted to argue Aliens, but I got to say Terminator 2 because it has, as Craig just said, that great mix of special effects, of action, and having a genuinely good story. And I will just say this as an aside, even the cutscenes for Terminator 2 are very well done. If you ever go on YouTube and watch them, like the scene where they actually removed the chip from the T8 Terminator's head, and they change, and it's actually like an important part of the film that gets cut out, but it's implied later on that the reason he grows as a machine to like understanding emotion and the like is because they removed that chip and he starts changing after that. Even the scenes with like Miles Dyson and his wife are actually pretty fun to watch. I sometimes joke that it feels like we're watching somebody like a sitcom get put into an action movie with their scenes. But it's such a great film in how it balances everything. In a film like that, it could very easily have lost balance in terms of special effects, et cetera. We're just saying his first Terminator film is great because it has a low budget. The second one, it shows that he can use a big budget effectively well. So I think it's his best film for all those reasons.
Yeah, so this is the question I have. I haven't heard an answer to it. Do they purposely make Miles Dyson's middle name Bennett just so Arnold has to say Bennett? This is the question that keeps me up at night. I have to imagine yes.
I want to go back actually because Rob, you're talking about how well the film is aged. I continually see memes. I saw one on Instagram the other night where in T2, Arnold's doing the thing where he takes the skin off of his left arm. It's like cutting your arm up to prove that you're not cake, even though someone when no one asked. All right. I want to compare this film to another film. Terminator versus Alien. What you got?
Oh, so I think they're similar in a lot of ways in that they're sci-fi. They're sci-fi horror.
Absolutely.
They're different types, right? So Terminator is more like the slasher movie, like the serial killer, because he's like
you can make an argument that this belongs in with like Friday the 13th and
or Halloween
or whatever. Yeah. That's why Jamie Lee Curtis, maybe could have worked, but he's literally going through a phone book, and killing women with the same name, and they even like say, it sounds like a serial killer thing. Oh, it's a full moon out, whereas Aliens is sci-fi horror, but it's a monster movie. So they're not dissimilar, but the reason I think Terminator is more compelling and I would argue Terminator has the more cultural resonance because it happens on Earth. It's recognizable to us. And the idea that, if we saw an alien, on the street, like, alien type alien, we'd figure out that's pretty weird and someone would shoot it.
You probably should have shoot it anyway, but go on.
But a Terminator, we could have Terminators next to us right now, and you'll never know. That's the beauty of that storyline.
I love that the little bit where Kyle Reese is talking. It's like the first ones didn't look right.
Yeah.
Right. And then they finally got them. Rob, you were going to say?
Well, I was going to say, I think Craig's spot on with that analysis. I would add, however, that I think one thing that makes the two films similar is what they say about the state of science fiction in the late 70s and early 80s, where you're starting to see more and more pessimism about the future, right? Terminator is, of course, the future war. And I think the irony of that film is that there are many online Terminator fans who say we want a film just set during the future war. We got that with Terminator Salvation, and folks weren't entirely happy. But I think the earlier films worked because you only saw bits and pieces of it, and they got across just how desolate the future actually was. And Alien, released in 1979, I think that's also compelling because unlike, say, Star Trek or other space-based science fiction franchises, Alien really makes space seem almost mundane. I mean, it's basically like a group of truckers out in space just hauling stuff. No, I'm serious. That's what they're doing. And
that's what they are.
Space road truckers.
Yeah, they're just
the History
doing
Channel.
up. And
Harry Dean Stanton is in that movie.
Right.
It's everything you know.
Yeah. And I think in both franchises are really critiquing the usual hopeful optimism about the future. And I think also what makes the two films so important is that because of that, they still continue to have a huge influence on the science fiction genre even today. With Terminator, you cannot think about films about AI and machines without inevitably referencing it against the Terminator franchise.
But it's not. But it's not even movies. It's mention AI. Everyone will go, well, what about Terminator? So how far can we go? What happens if the AI becomes self-aware? And Terminator did that.
I was literally at a conference last week at my university, a conference on English language pedagogy and teaching in the classroom. And there's a whole session about AI, and we're making jokes about the Terminator in that session. So you're absolutely right.
So, whenever someone, again, talks about AI in teaching or grading or whatever, or AIs are whatever, I always ask, did Miles Bennett Dyson write this? That's where my head goes. And the thing is, we are wrestling right now with these very questions. Like somewhere out there is a Miles Dyson, someone like that, who is working on cutting edge technology that's doing it for all the right reasons, hopefully. But you don't know how it's going to turn out. And I think Terminator brings up important ethical questions that we have to ask. How far can we go? It's sort of like war games, right? The idea of keeping a person always in the loop, making sure that decisions are always made by a person, not by a machine. But then I think that is something that's shaped by it. You could argue war games too, but I think Terminator does that. More specifically, like, look, that machines do not have ethics. They do not have morals until you get to T2 when Arnold needs to be the hero and they can learn.
And then they can love. All right, I want to ask you this. At its heart, I think we might be able to agree, hopefully, that Terminator is an apocalypse film.
Yeah, of course.
Certainly falls in that genre amongst other genres. Because we're in such a great spirits with the election coming up in just a few days. Give me your three favorite apocalypse films. Rob, you go first. Craig's been leading off.
Okay. I can't.
I put you on the spot. I didn't prep you on this.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up because I think we can't forget the whole nuclear war angle in the Terminator franchise as well.
Small little aspect that everyone dies.
And I think with apocalypse films, I think Terminator is certainly one of them. I would actually throw in a film called Threads from Great Britain. It's more of like a miniseries that comes out, I think, actually in '84. It's basically their version of The Day After, but it's 10 times more depressing. Because
how is that possible?
Well, because in Threads, it's set in Great Britain. But
food is bad.
Well, putting that aside for a moment. what Threads does is it goes weeks, months, and then years after a nuclear war. And by the end of the film, what you're seeing is civilization has totally collapsed, because they're talking about things like education has just come to an end. There are not enough teachers. The kids are learning at a very rudimentary level. It just gets into how bad nuclear war could get in a way that even the day after doesn't quite touch. And then I think in terms of a third apocalypse film, I would have to throw in, even if you don't know it's an apocalypse until the very end, Planet of the Apes from '68.
Oh,
that really captures this idea of,
great call, Rob,
not only the apocalypse, but humanity being just destroyed and put back into Stone Age state. And you watching the film and like thinking, oh, this is a great film, until the very end, and you're like, oh, okay.
Oh my God. I was wrong. It was Earth all along.
Also, I will give a special mention, an honorable mention to Soylent Green, because I think that film, even though everybody knows the twist, when you watch it, it is actually a very depressing film. The scene where they're eating like a piece of lettuce, and they're talking about how tasty and succulent it is like, well, this is really, really bad. So it's apocalypse without nuclear warfare, but it's an apocalypse born out of a population boom that everyone in the 1970s was gravely concerned about.
Charlton Heston.
I'm shocked we haven't seen a remake of Soylent Green, by the way.
Charlton Heston is he the king of apocalypse movies? He's got Planet of the Apes, he's got Soylent Green, he's got Omega Man. So in the 70s, he's sort of the dominant
head of the NRA.
Always trying to talk modern politics. He's dead.
I had to.
All right, so I'll give you mine. Not with it, no comments on modern politics or any election. I think Rob's right with Planet of the Apes, but I'm not going to pick that one because he already said it. Independence Day, because
fun.
I think whenever if an advanced alien species shows up, it's probably not a good thing. And that's something that's been dealt with, whether it's from the Twilight Zone to Mars attacks, right? Or, a trophy hunter that hangs out in Valverde. I don't know. But I'm going to go Independence Day. I'd also, let's see, what else would I do? Again, it's not technically an apocalypse film, but it's on the verge of it. Failsafe in the 1950s about where you have bombers scrambled in the air. There's a false alarm, but they can't call them back. So it's hanging there. Some nukes get dropped, but it's not complete destruction. But so I think that one. I wasn't big on all the asteroid ones in the late 90s, whether it's Armageddon or Deep Impact.
Deep Impact always sounded like a porn movie to me.
Lewd.
I actually preferred that one over Armageddon, but
I do too. It's more of a thinking person. Armageddon is like an Aerosmith video for 2 hours. And all respect to my friend Marshall Teague, who is in the film and gets killed. He's the pilot of the first ship that gets blown up. Marshall, we love you. He's friend of the pod.
I mean, a lot of the ones I like are about on the verge of it, rather than like the desolate waste.
I want to give you some that I like very much. Road Warrior. Yeah, it's your classic apocalypse film, right? The whole world's fallen to shambles, and you could do a bunch of these. Obviously, the most recent Mad Max film with Tom Hardy, I think, is one of the most beautiful films.
Too weird. I watched it. Too just not my thing. I could appreciate it was well done. But...
It's a 2-hour chase film, is what it is. They run to a place and then they run back.
Yeah,
and it just never lets up. And for the audience, that can be exhausting because a lot of times these films you actually need some downtime to kind of collect yourself between scenes, and it just never lets up. It is full on adrenaline. Similar to Road Warrior, there's a film in 1987 called Steel Dawn, starring Patrick Swayze. Do you know this movie?
Yep.
Direct to video. I've got it in front of me. Budget of $3.5 million. Box office, very specific, $562,187. I remember watching it on video years and years. I haven't seen it forever. I would love to watch this again. I see it one time years ago, but it's in my head. I love zombie films as apocalypse films. So I'm going to go. We just did a zombie film on the spot, but I'm going to say 28 Days Later is a really good one to do.
I'm going to throw another one because, again, I just forgot it. You just triggered a memory. Shaun of the Dead.
There you go. So I mean,
I will throw in one more honorable mention going back to alien invasion films and going back to the large theme of the podcast this evening. War of the Worlds from 1953. Because that was one of the earliest examples of aliens coming to Earth, blowing everything up. And the Cold War context is really important because in the film, and this is always jarring to me, they actually use World War II footage to showcase some of the devastation around the world. But you see the American military just getting annihilated throughout the film on our own soil. And again, the ending, it takes on H.G. Wells' ending of bacteria killing the aliens to making more like God basically killed the aliens. So it's, again, that Cold War context. But that 1953 War of the Worlds.
You think God has cooties?
So I did not say that. I'm simply saying that the 1953 War of the Worlds film is another great example of this genre that we're talking about. Because in that film, and also Independence Day, the irony is that nuclear weapons don't save us.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that's
they do annihilate Houston, which isn't really a bad thing.
That's that.
We've done now The Patriot.
Yeah.
We've done Rocky IV.
Yeah.
We are firmly planted in Americana here.
We did Predator.
Did Rocky IV, Patriot. This is Terminator. You both have done other pods as well without one another, and that was sad. Just the magic was gone. What's next? I mean, Commandos, obviously.
Okay.
It's just sitting there.
I was going to say...
We're doing Commando?
I mean, Commando, obviously, but I think at some point, maybe True Lies. That has not
been done.
Just True Lies next. The True Lies?
True. Again, I have a whole theory about True Lies, how True Lies shows America at the peak of its power. So I have a whole theory about this.
Don't ruin the pot, actually.
Just I'm not going to say another word.
All right, good. Craig Smith, Robert Greene.
We'll be back.
Just say it. Just do it. Go on, Rob. Give it to us. Let's hear it.
Well, we'll be back. I mean,
Rob's like, I got nothing else going on. I'm in. Just do it. Go on, Rob. Let's hear it. One more time. We'll be back.
We'll be back.
I know.
I travel across time for you guys.
Okay, now it's time for somebody to let off some steam. All right, let's just.
Bennett.
Before we end, random crossover. CM Punk, the wrestler. Rob sent this to me. He and his wife, former wrestler AJ Lee, now AJ Mendez, their Halloween costume was Bennett and Jenny. You need to go on Instagram. Look right now.
I don't recall hilarious. Robert Greene II sending me that post.
Because he knows your thoughts on Bennett.
Just my thoughts on Australians in general, but that's fine. Bye, guys.
See ya.
Have a good one.
And that's a wrap here at Historians of the Movies podcast. Thank you guys so much for being here today. We came across an ocean of time for you guys. Thank you so much to our guests, Craig Bruce Smith and Robert Greene II. Thank you, of course, to our producer, Fletcher Powell, for making this show run. And most of all, to you guys for continuing to listen in and share and be part of this HATM community. Couple quick notes. Hey, The Reckoning is launching on November 12th. So that's on Tuesday. So if you're listening in, we've got a brand new podcast coming in for you. It's going to be a little bit different. It's a little bit more stripped down, but it's more of a straightforward conversation show that I think you're going to like. It's not movies or history related. It's me talking to people from all over the world, talking all kinds of different walks of life. Check it out. It's called Reckoning with Jason Herbert. You can find that on Apple or on Spotify. And again, if you want to help support the pod, you can do so by going to patreon.com/historians of the movies. It's a great way to help us keep going, to bring you even more content. There's some stuff right now for you guys on the Patreon page. There's an exclusive right now for you, BC Boys with Jeff Melnick and Acrobatic and Dart Adams. We're talking about that film. So there's a lot for you guys there. We're going to have even more content. And look, the basic idea behind this is if we can get to a point where we can start buying some advertising, we're going to try to blow this lid right off of this thing. So thank you so much for your support. It really means the world to me. Thanks for being here, guys. Ciao for now. Bye.